I hope everyone's feeling refreshed and ready to go for the next few sessions to take us through to lunchtime. And thanks again to the SMMT. I think it's my fourth rodeo. But for those that don't know me, I'm a partner at commercial law firm Pinsent Masons. And for the last 20 years or so, I've been advising OEMs and suppliers on a range of issues around supply chain. I think it's fair to say, though, over the last few years, those issues have changed. Typically, it was around cost and quality and delivery. Now it's very much around, on a weekly basis, advising on tariffs, trade barriers, supply distress, cyber instances, changing regulation, geopolitical, war, you name it. And quite often all of these things at the same time. Now, as a lawyer for my sins, my instinct is to reach for the contract and try and work out where our rights are, where our obligations are, what the next steps are. But even I've understood over the last few years that protection in contracts isn't sufficient alone. Things are often too interconnected, the risks often happen at far too much pace and are increasingly strategic. If the last few years have taught us anything, it's that resilience is not about avoiding disruption. Whether it's COVID, semiconductor crises, cyber attacks, energy prices, disruption has now become a rather permanent feature of our operating environment. The question for the UK automotive sector now is therefore not how we eliminate risk, but how we build the capability to both anticipate it, absorb it, and adapt to it whilst remaining competitive and continuing to grow. And that's why I'm so pleased. We've got such a diverse panel with us today. We have perspectives spanning automotive manufacturing, cyber risk, materials and industrial capability, and defence planning. Each bring a very unique and different lens on resilience, and together they offer a perspective on what it will take to build a supply chain that is robust, agile, and strategically secure for the future. So whilst the video runs, I'd like to introduce onto the stage Russell, Stephen, Kelly, and Kieran.
From my perspective, resilience in UK automotive is about more than continuity. It's about adapting quickly, diversifying risk, and protecting the capabilities that really matter. And that has to include cyber, because disruption today can come from anywhere.
The chip shortage arising from COVID and the recent events in the Middle East show us how important it is to have flexibility in our domestic supply chains and localization of supply. Material circularity, like with the electric arc furnace being built behind me, will be key to ensure that our supply chains are sustainable for many generations to come.
Since 2020, our industry has been battered by some of the biggest crises of our lifetime. Yet there's a core of suppliers who fought through and successfully responded to these challenges. Local suppliers can increase stability in an unpredictable world, and UK vehicle manufacturers should recognise the value of this for their own security.
Great, thank you all for joining me. I think let's just kick off. I guess if we could start with yourself, Stephen, kind of what does a resilient UK supply chain look like for you?
I think in the first instance, you know, it'd be amazing if we'd got a UK supply chain that down to tier N was self-sustaining, was within the locality. But right now we're not quite there. So in the meantime, the supply chain really needs to understand itself. So as a tier 1, tier 2, you need to question whether or not you really know where these parts are coming from. You know, semiconductors were just mentioned. You've got to understand where those semiconductors were manufactured. And when we had the real challenges with that a couple of years ago, we found out that these things were made in sometimes 3 different countries, 2 continents. They were being passed backwards and forwards for front-end, back-end manufacturing. And that level of lack of understanding was really hard work when we suddenly had a crisis on our hands. So first of all, yeah, understand the product. Secondly, work out if there are alternatives out there and set up supply chain strategies that will allow you to pivot in the case of a Strait of Hormuz issue, in the case of an earthquake, in the case of fire, plague of locusts, whatever the hell it's going to be next. And finally, we talked about understand where the supply chain is and where it's coming from. Make sure you understand what you're buying. Make sure you understand that that widget is pressed, is made out of a material that only grows on one island in the middle of the South Pacific, and so may cause you a challenge. Make sure you understand how it's put together, who can put it together, what it is that in the case of a problem or in the case of a supply chain issue, you can be part of the solution and you can help to speed through the process because you actively understand what it is you're buying and what you're trying to fix.
Brilliant, thank you. And I guess changing sector completely, Kieran, if I can come to you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think some of it's similar, right? So some of it is about understanding that supply chain. So, and I don't think we've done a great job about that in the past in the Ministry of Defence. We've tended to rely on prime defence contractors to deliver us capabilities and then allow them to deliver the kind of supply chain underneath that. And in the defence industrial strategy, we recognise we need to do better. Need to understand where it's coming from. We need to be able to actively manage it and get below the skin of the primes so that we can work out where it's coming from. There are some constraints on where some of the components should come from in defence industry. You won't be surprised to understand. And we need to make sure that it can survive those shocks that you talked about, because the chances of us needing to use it are significantly increased when there is a global shock. And so that's absolutely critical for us that the supply chain is resilient. And we've seen those disrupted, across the defence sector, as you have, I think, across the automotive sector with recent, global shocks and conflicts increasing across the world. A resilient supply chain for us can do two things, really. It can absorb those shocks and it can carry on, but it also needs to be able to adapt. So we need to understand how we can adapt to be able to fight as a sovereign nation. The lesson you see from Ukraine is that Ukraine has continued fighting, it's adapted its technology, but it has also adapted, as most countries do in a fight for national survival, it has adapted all of its industries to pivot towards being able to supply a defence sector that can fight to sustain the country. And so a supply chain for us needs to consider that at the outset in the future, and how we can engage early with industries that are outside the traditional defence sector to provide that resilience in our supply chains, whether that's manufacturing the same component, whether that's manufacturing a different component, but ensuring they can survive. And the defence industry has tended to have a reliance on some small companies to produce that. So we fund the procurement and the manufacture of a product, and the supply chain underneath that sometimes relies on that defence investment. That defence investment, as you may or may not have seen over the last few years, it wrestles with the financial pressures that the government has to wrestle with. So we're not necessarily the very best of customers, and those orders can dry up. But I need the supply chain to be able to survive underneath that. So how do we think about a different supply chain that can survive with or without defence orders, or can be shifted around to provide that resilience?
Yeah. Thank you, that's really insightful. Russell?
Well, for me, it's sort of three areas that sort of underpins that kind of resilience. As Stephen was describing, actually really understanding your supply chain when there's all the sort of environmental or war-related or other political shocks that have taken place around the world recently. And it never ceases to surprise me how surprised we become when suddenly something's disrupted. You shut the Strait of Hormuz and you're surprised that no longer is there any gas or oil. Perhaps that's the obvious piece. But clearly there's other specialist gases that come out of the Middle East, and suddenly we're surprised that it's a problem to us, and it's always been a geopolitical hotspot. I mean, for us as a steel producer, when the Ukraine conflict started, energy prices went through the roof, and one of our core suppliers based in the UK that produced some chemicals as a byproduct that was a key part of our process, no longer did it make sense for them to produce products in the UK, and they diversified back to where they were where their company originated from, and suddenly we lost a really fundamental chemical in the manufacturing process of steel. So it's about understanding your supply chain. That's number one. Number two is the obvious thing, I think, today for certainly the steel industry. Just this morning, the European Union has announced an array of trade measures, tariffs and quotas for imports into the European Union. It's had a massive impact on us as a business. In fact, about 60% of our quota arrangement we had for the last sort of 5-10 years has now been cut as of tomorrow. And we need to be able to address and understand and think ahead of those challenges in those sort of geopolitical challenges in respect of tariffs and quotas. But the third area, I suppose, is the one that we need to all think about in terms of being ahead of the curve a little bit more. And that's around the sort of bigger drivers in society, sustainability and those sort of related features. And one of the things that we're having to do as a steel company is contemplate how do we manage our business for the future, invest in our business to be able to reduce our emissions and make sure that we're there for the next 100 years. So obviously some people will know that we've stopped producing, utilising a blast furnace steel making process, and we're in the process of transitioning to an electric arc furnace based steel manufacturing process. And that is a huge level of investment that we're putting forward so that we're there for the future and resilient to the challenges that come.
Brilliant, thank you. And finally, from a cyber perspective, Kelly?
Look, I concur with a lot of the comments. It's being able to work through shock, and shock is a word I think we would all use regardless of our industry, and keep going, because it's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen, particularly from a cyber perspective as technology becomes a lot more interconnected. So from my perspective, it's really about visibility, and that can be hard when it comes to cyber and technology as well. It's understanding who your critical suppliers are. We all know that. We're all doing it the best we can, but most people are looking at the large suppliers, but it can sometimes be the real small niche suppliers that are mission critical to your business. So really understanding that and building the redundancy around that. The digital dependencies, the software that you're using, if there's a fault and that goes down, or one of your suppliers is also impacted from just an outage, it doesn't have to be, a cyber attack, malicious at all. This could have a serious impact, and we have seen this in this industry, of course. Where is data flowing? Data is critical to what you guys do. So again, understanding where that is, the integrity around that data, particularly as we come into the AI world, and then really looking at that single point of failure, that business critical isolated event that could really bring you down and stop your operational. So really looking at what that operational disruption would look like. And it's something you'll hear time and time again from me, because I'm just passionate. I've been in the trenches now with clients. It's preparedness. You cannot do this during a crisis. You need to be prepared. Practice, understand what does bad day look like you, who makes the decisions in those critical times, and just continually exercise what those critical scenarios mean to your business.
That's great. Now, a couple of you have mentioned around diversification and de-risking. Perhaps if I can come to yourself, Russell, first, if that's okay, around what measures can organisations take to de-risk and diversify?
Well, I suppose the big challenges, as we just described, are about the internationalisation of some of these features. And I suppose when you look back, we've been through a cycle of globalisation. We tried to find where the specialisms are in the world and the lower cost points of production play out. But as we've just heard, these things have bigger factors to us when suddenly this disruption takes place. So I think we need to think more broadly around our supply chains and how do we make sure that they're structured in a way which is ready to defend ourselves against those pieces that come up and bite us in the night. So I suppose the key piece for me is certainly when we look at our own business is around what can we do around localization. We're building this furnace that I keep talking about. And a big part of that is about making sure that we're developing our own local contractors, our local skills, our local understanding about our business, so that we've got a supply chain that sits around us that we can call up in the middle of the night to come and solve something or to deal with a specific issue. So I think from our point of view, localization is a critical feature in that. The other piece, when I look to my third problem in terms of the sort of sustainability, and I think we've got to be thinking a little bit more around circular economies. So when we're utilising resources which are scarce and in a distant location, it adds extra challenges for us. And if we think a little bit more about how we can reuse things and recycle things, and again, materials are a classic example of that, and then taking advantage of the strengths that we've got locally. In the UK, it so happens that we produce nearly twice as much scrap steel in our recycled aspects of our business than actually is consumed in the UK. So we've got actually a strong resource that sits locally in the UK that we can take advantage of. Instead of having to ship raw materials from the other side of the world through the Strait of Hormuz or wherever else the latest disruptor may or may not take place. So I think if we think a little bit more about localization, think about how we take advantage of the strengths that we have in our domestic supply chain. And we heard this morning from some of the speakers around the real strengths in this country, in our automotive industry in the UK. We've been the pioneers in many, many different products, many, many different engineered products. And we've got that skill and that understanding that I think we need to find a way of building upon that gives us that strength for the future.
Perfect, thank you. Kieran, if I can come to you.
Yeah, so I think if I take a Army MOD perspective on diversification and de-risking, what would I want from that? I mean, I think we need to look at how we can better exploit dual use technology. So this really comes back to how do we sustain the army when we know that the first army is going to go and fight and potentially get ground, and then you're going to need a second army and maybe a third army. So how do you have the technology to be able to de-risk producing that second stuff? So how can we exploit dual use technology? Uncrewed ground vehicles, you will, if you have managed to hear the Prime Minister talk about a defence investment plan. I've heard there's kind of 150 million for uncrewed ground vehicles in that. What do they look like? I'm not sure. How are Ukraine using them? But you're an automotive industry, right? That feels like you've probably got the skill set to produce uncrewed ground vehicles as you move out on vehicles and autonomous vehicles and drive-by-wire vehicles. How can we turn to you to help us deliver that capability when the first wave of them has probably been destroyed, or at least is grinding to a halt? How can we exploit the software and the learning that is in the automotive industry to help us operate those systems in the field? And likewise, how can we share what we're doing in operating in complex terrain, very difficult autonomous area to try and operate back into the automotive industry in the UK? Same components and that supply chain. Logistics and moving things forward. How can we optimize where we're spending our money in defence to be at the cutting edge where we can rely on the rest of the country to provide some of those facilities? Can we rely on a UK logistics system to get all of our parts forward for us at the point in time that we need them, rather than having to do that ourselves in defence? So you can better spend the defence pound on that which only defence can do. And then I think the trade-off is we need to do this for the whole of NATO and our allies, and we don't know where the next conflict is. If the next conflict is a Indo-Pacific conflict, then it's entirely possible that a European defence sector is pivoting out to export and support our allies in the Indo-Pacific region. Or if it's a continental fight, that anybody that's not on the landlocked continent is better able to defend themselves and then support an export market into our NATO partners and allies. And we're trying to drive standardization into those things specifically for that reason, so we can all share manufacturing capacity. So there's opportunity there for export. And then I think the final thing on diversification and de-risking is people. So, we have a reserve force in the army that can and will be part of your workforce. And I hope they offer skills and talents into your workforce that they get from being members of the armed forces in terms of leadership and personal resilience and different experiences and opportunities, but equally, they bring back to us all of the skills that you give them in industry that helps us be better. There's a reason that the Ukrainian armed forces have pivoted to such exquisite or such brilliant use of novel technologies and been able to innovate on the front line. And it's because their soldiers are now you, because their army has been fighting for a long time and is now filled with university graduates and professors and people that have come out of the industry and are able to pivot and innovate on the front line. Well, we can do that in peacetime if we think about diversifying our workforce and exploiting a relationship between the kind of reserve and industry.
Thank you. Kelly?
There's not a lot more I can add other than really, I learned a lot from that, thank you. Really around looking at those critical dependencies, as I said before. I think supply chains aren't easy to solve, never will be easy to solve. So it's really looking at, insight, data, really trying to bring that back to where those critical dependencies are. It can't be a procurement theory anymore. It really, really has to be driven by insights. So that's what I'll add to this.
I guess just from a purely de-risking perspective, you mentioned some of the challenges and not putting all eggs in one basket. Stephen, how about you?
Yeah, first of all, if I can just pick up on what Russ and Kieran have said. You went with localisation and you talked about where our next conflict will be is unknown. It isn't going to be an English civil war. And it's the only thing that I'm prepared to put my house on right now. It's in a world of uncertainty, localization reduces risk enormously. And the next Strait of Hormuz is not going to be the Manchester Ship Canal. So my view of what vehicle manufacturers need to start doing is recognizing that there's a pound value in what suppliers in the UK bring to UK automotive industry, because they take away layers of uncertainty. And if our long-term partners deliver a continuation of supply and a level of certainty that is worth real money. And I don't think that level of money is ever attributed to those suppliers during sourcing processes. And I think that has to change. I think there needs to be a level of honesty that actually allows that to happen. Bringing it right back to individual suppliers now, and what is it that a supplier can do to de-risk? I'm afraid it's the unsexy stuff. You need to be managing your cash flow every single day. You need to be having customers who are monitored for payments and not have a very, very low tolerance of late payment or short payment. You need to be able to take on business and target business that, first of all, sweats the assets you've already got, and secondly, becomes kind of volume agnostic, because our world is so complex and so unclear at the moment that we have no idea what vehicle volumes are going to be next month or next year or 3 years later. And so you can't plan for 500,000 units anymore. You need to be able to plan to make the units that are demanded. And the only way to do that is to have a load of equipment that you're working as hard as possible for as long as possible. So making yourself a resilient supplier and choosing sub-suppliers that do the same, that's where you de-risk, and that's where you manage to actually make money out of anything you sell, rather than making money out of hitting a volume and eventually clearing that profit because you've had a good month or a good year or something.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. And then in terms of the automotive sector itself, what can it learn, I guess, from aligned industries in terms of securing capabilities? If I can come to you, Kelly.
Sure, I think from an IT and technology perspective, I think we are very good at collaboration across industries, government, defence. I think we're getting better at sharing the lessons learned. But it really, if we really look at the critical industries that are regulated, they've been ahead of this because they've had to be. So they've really brought up the standard from what best practice looks like. So I always say, always look at the regulations. What are the requirements within those regulations? And if they're not relevant to you, that doesn't matter. Just try to implement some of those best standards. So I think it's just understanding and looking at those lessons learned. So we try to bring a lot of insight out, as I said before, in the trenches, understanding what is critical. Cash flow is one of the most critical things that we see when it comes to a cyber event. You are not operating. You may have malicious threat actors within your systems. You can't even communicate within your systems, and most people go to WhatsApp, and that's just not appropriate, right? Like, again, understanding, having an off-band communication channel to be able to do that. So what does good look like is what we need to really bring out, and ask the people that know this. Oh, I think I've gone off. Can you hear me? No? Maybe. Oh, I'm back. Okay. And just really collaborate and look to your partners. Ask your technology providers as well. What are their redundancies? It's all around that critical point of operation from a cyber perspective.
And Russell?
Far be it from me to use the steel industry as a point of learning for the automotive industry. Bear with me, please. As I mentioned, we've just had the announcements today from the European Union of the action on imports into the European Union to defend the single market. And of course, we've got the Industrial Accelerator Act that's just about, and the Made in Europe objectives that are sort of playing out for the automotive industry. And I think one of the points of learning that I have certainly been through as I've been going through all the sort of trade challenges with the EU and with the UK government in the last year or two is I think we need to find a way of negotiating from our point of strength. For good or bad, we're not in the European Union anymore, but we remain a big consumer. And I think 70% of vehicles that come into the UK come from the European Union. And we need to use that as our leveraging point with probably our biggest trading partner. And we've got a UK automotive supply chain that, in terms of vehicle production, has certainly been in some substantive decline over recent years. And we've got to question whether our own supply chains are substantive enough to continue. And I think point of learning for the UK government is that it needs to negotiate on our behalf collectively for our industries. And we need to make sure that we're building on the strengths that we have and the points of negotiation that we have. And I think that we need to make sure that we're educating government that it's a business partner and not someone that's sort of sitting remotely that doesn't quite understand, and maybe some of the past where free trade practices are the ideal that we want to play with. But unfortunately, we're in a world of interventionism, whether that's about trying to decarbonise or whether it's about trying to address the disparities that exist in global trade. And now we've all got to work together to try to make sure that we've got a future together. And I think that, on top of that, working collectively with government to be able to build and strengthen UK supply chains, I think we've also got to look at the diversification spaces. Announcements today, and we'll have continued announcements about increased levels of expenditure on our defence budget. And I do think that the automotive supply chain has got a huge amount to offer defence and aerospace and many other industries that are still remaining in the growth space. And I think we need to make sure that we've got our collective supply chains that are there for the future and able to withstand all these other disruptions that we have. And diversification clearly is a key part of achieving that.
That's great. And that probably brings me neatly onto yourself, Kieran, if that's okay. How can the MOD and the automotive sector sort of deepen their working relationship?
It's an interesting question in terms of that working relationship. I'm not 100% sure I know the answer to that. In terms of engaging with industries from a position of the public sector requires us to follow public procurement rules and regulations. Those rules and regulations encourage an amount of competition that sets us in a very deliberate process to get close to industry. We can have lots of conversations with industry, and we can, work and experiment at small scale and minor levels. But to actually formalise a relationship is quite a process undertaking, and that in some ways is a barrier to us being able to get really close in the stuff that I've described, where we're talking about, directing companies to be thinking about how you support the supply chain or how you support manufacturing. Wouldn't it be lovely if I could pick a defence contractor and then tell them to go and work with 3 other, automotive industries, so that we know what they've got baked in as their resilience, and then there's a constant throughput of business into the automotive industry as well from that defence sector. But I'm not yet in a position to be able to do that. There are some challenges around that, most of which fall away when you go to a time of conflict. The art for us is how we prepare sufficiently to be able to be ready for that time of conflict. So I think it comes back to the kind of point I made before. It's about, how can we exploit dual use technologies, which potentially drives down cost for the MOD, increases business for those providing those dual use technologies, whether that is building small UAS motors, or whether that is providing uncrewed ground vehicles based off the chassis of a 4x4 truck that is produced. How can we do that? So it drives down our costs because you've got a market that isn't just us, but allows us to help support you exporting that capability into our allies and partners. Because part of the way we deal with that critical capability shortfall is allies and partners, and sharing that across the globe, because we tend not to be in competition with our allied industries, hopefully. Yeah. So I think, I don't know if that really answers the question, but those are probably running out of thoughts.
No, that's great, thank you. And I guess just a quick heads up, the panel have actually said they're willing to take questions at the very end, so get your thinking caps on. But just, I guess my last question, if you could just spend literally a minute each. I guess, what do you think is needed to enable businesses to succeed in this current challenging environment? I'll come to yourself, Stephen.
I think certainty breeds success. And so what we're looking for are government initiatives that allow an industry to plan effectively, to have an idea as to what the future may bring, and for a government to really stand there and say, okay, this is what we're doing, this is clearly how we're going to deliver it, and these are the structures we're putting in place, now you guys go off and do it. Vehicle manufacturers, I'd love to see a real partnership approach and a long-term partnership approach where they approach suppliers and ask for the best delivered solution and for the best ideas, and work in collaboration to deliver development that then becomes producible and becomes something that is going to give a profitable set of business for a defined amount of time. And fundamentally, when things get tough, when we have short cycling, when we have lower volumes than anticipated, that the impact on that supplier is then understood, and we work together to work around that, because that uncertainty is a given now. So we've got to work on that. And from a supplier side of things, I think fundamentally we're looking for suppliers who do what British suppliers have done brilliantly for years. The UK manufacturing industry has always been great at understanding opportunity in the face of adversity. And every change brings an opportunity, we're absolutely clear. So allow those suppliers to find those opportunities in there, and allow those opportunities to bring back success to the supply base. There's a huge amount of knowledge and value that we can add, and I'm really sure that we can continue doing that for many more years.
Sure, thank you. I guess super quick if we can keep them brief till our time. Kelly, I'll come to you.
In the lead-up, I obviously knew this question was going to come, so I did write down, I thought, what's a positive way we can talk about supply chain, because a lot of people think of it as a compliance exercise, and it is. There's no doubt getting around that. But I think we don't. I wrote down. I don't think of. Please don't think of reliance as that compliance exercise. It's becoming a real differentiator in your performance, in the trust in you, and long-term competitiveness as well. So really try to embed that into the culture within the organisation, and hopefully get a bit more buy-in.
Perfect, thanks. Russell?
I think my simple answer is we've got to find better ways of collaborating. If there's ever an advantage of Brexit, we've got closer relationships with government. And I think working across supply chains, understanding knowledge and learning from each other in different companies, but also working in partnership with government is critical. My sister company colleague that was describing the developments in Agratas earlier was describing something which we're experiencing within Tata Steel as well. 20% more expensive to build something in India in comparison with China, but it's 3 to 4 times more expensive to build something in the UK. That just simply can't be something we just sit back and accept. And we've got to find ways of working together to try to drive that improvement. And that will lead to better resilience, better responsiveness and speed. And we need to be able to build on those learnings and make sure that we're getting the right policies and government engagement with business to be able to deliver these solutions and enable us to be competitive in that global stage.
Perfect. And lastly, Kieran.
So you've told me to be quick, but you've asked me how we can help succeed in the current challenging environment. And coming out of the defence sector, I'd say, well, the first thing is to make the environment less challenging, right? I did listen to some of the Prime Minister talking about Defence Investment Plan, and they talked a bit about national security as economic security. I think Rachel Reeves talked about securonomics again. We're in a really volatile world, right? It hasn't been this volatile for decades. And it's not far away either, it's here. So undersea cables, cyber attacks, physical attacks. The conflict is changing, but how do we do better at that? How can we collectively try and prevent that? Well, deterrence. So we defend through deterrence, but we also try and stabilise the world through deterrence. How do we achieve deterrence as part of a NATO alliance? Well, it comes back to a little bit of what I said. Let's make the most of our defence pound to be able to more cost effectively create defence capability that then increases deterrence. Show that we can scale easily and rapidly. Make sure that the enemy understands that we can innovate at pace and then scale that innovation when required. And that's that exploitation of dual-use technology. There are loads of small, medium enterprises out there that are thriving now and coming up with brilliant ideas. But for some of them, it's really difficult to then show that they can scale and compete in a market that is largely in the past has been dominated by significant large defence primes. Some of those defence primes will either just buy out those SMEs, or some of them will work with them and support them and collaborate. But that doesn't have to be a defence sector only thing. There are SMEs out there that are producing technology that could be produced and scaled by your industries. I have absolutely no doubt of that. There are opportunities to partner with these small, medium enterprises to help you sustain the business, to help us and our NATO allies have capability with a clear demonstration of being able to scale that at the point of need. And the other bit is, a national conversation about the reality of this. Make sure our enemies understand that as a country, we recognise the threat, the unstable climate that we're operating in, and that we're willing to respond to it, and that we're ready to react to it. And a combination of those things provides a stronger UK that supports NATO deterrence that hopefully, over time, helps stabilise the kind of challenging climate by insisting that our adversaries understand that we are ready to respond, capable of responding, and will and can, and then hopefully we kind of start to settle some of the conflicts. So there's a bit of a call to arms for all of us there. The Strategic Defence Review talked about a national conversation. I'm not sure we've really got there. How many people are willing to pay a bit more for their stuff, knowing that some of that money goes to supporting us having a better, more capable defence service that then provides deterrence, that means we're more stable, and then over time things slow down and change.
Right. These guys have done a great job of running down the clock so they don't have to answer any questions, but I've probably got time for one question. Iman.
Emma Martin from Marsh. Thank you so much. It was really very interesting discussion. Defense, I think the first time at the SMMT summit, so really very insightful. But it seems also that we're talking about more not economic growth, but really economic security, which is emerging from the discussion. And really my question is to you, Kieran. So you know the net zero discussions in the UK and the ZEF mandate and banning ICE. We know that the defense vehicles actually, the tankers all running through ICE and fossil fuel. And we know that also there's a discussion in Germany with the German government that they're looking actually all of the public transport cannot be electrified because when you have a blackout in the electricity, you cannot charge. But also I'm sure if we have a war that you will not have a charging network in Iran. So therefore, we need to look into diversification and resilience of the supply chain. And I think a thought to you, the minute the suppliers, Bosch one of them, we are actually lowering our production in ICE to be zero also, depending on the trajectory, this will affect you because the volume will be little. And that means is that the pricing will go up. And we do believe that having more technology-neutral approach has as well an element of national security. And that's why I'm not saying an appel to you to join the force of actually harmonizing and allowing more, a net zero with a balanced discussion, technology-neutral. But I'm just giving the thought to you, did you think about it? Did you have also a conversation with the NATO about it? We know that this discussion is happening as we speak.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try and answer the question. Yes is the short answer. We're definitely having a conversation about it. So the provision of power and energy to the battlefield is kind of more important than ever as we move out on autonomous systems and uncrewed systems and drones, and all of that needs power. So small drones take batteries, larger uncrewed systems will, potentially electrified, potentially internal combustion, potentially hybrid. All of that could be true in the future. But we absolutely recognize we are becoming more and more power hungry as a defense force, and certainly as a land and army force, and how we operate. NATO has a single fuel policy, so that when we go and fight as an alliance, we recognize that we can share fuel across our allies. We can use fuel that is stored forward if we have to deploy and fight forward. So we're trying to work out how in the British Defence Force and across NATO, we take that single fuel policy and adapt that to a future conflict where we need to be power hungry. We definitely need to be able to charge batteries. Our battery growth is huge. And we need to be able to do that resiliently, as you say. So can you rely on an electric infrastructure that's in your host nation to provide that level of power? Probably not. That's not the assumption we make in the army, that when we go to fight, we can just plug into a grid and take that. Equally, it's not the assumption that you can turn up necessarily and draw fuel from the local power stations and fuel infrastructure, because eventually that will stop working when you're in amongst the area where you're fighting. So we need to be able to provide that ourselves. So there's quite a lot of thinking going on that. We're thinking about that, how we move out on our future vehicles, how you can make them more about hybrid vehicles. So that's as much that we can power the vehicles more efficiently, and take power off them to power subsystems, munitions, drones, whatever else it is that requires power. And there's a lot of those. I think we recognise the drive for sustainability, climate change, and a move towards being more effective like that. Quite a lot of that is going on around the defence infrastructure, about how we can use our buildings to generate more solar power. Defence has a reasonable sized estate and footprint across the UK, so there's a lot of work going into, as we modernise the defence estate, how we can generate more of our own power. That tends to be about how we operate in the homeland. And then the stuff I've talked about before is about how we get into a better position to be able to share fuel across and power across NATO. And that's all the way from, do we adapt the single fuel policy through to do we make sure that our batteries are interchangeable and the connector between your battery and your subsystem is the same as your allies, so you can borrow their battery and each other's and share power like that, into novel technologies around microgrids so that anybody can draw power from anything that's got power to supply. So you take a deployed headquarters with a load of radios that traditionally runs generators chugging away by the side of it. How can we use the vehicles that got us there to deliver us the power that they've got left in them to provide that headquarters silent running, which is more efficient for us tactically, and more efficiently? So could we be charging batteries while we're traveling towards where we're deploying a headquarters? Some of those will be underground, some of those will be above ground. All of that is true. So yes, a lot of thinking. We haven't quite nailed an answer. And as we're moving out on our next round of vehicles, we're looking hard at how we can extract the most power from them in the most efficient way.
I'm really afraid that we have really run out of time now. I'm going to get sacked. But if it just leaves to say thank you very much to the panel here, Kelly, Russell, Kieran and Stephen.